everybody, today's talk is on my favorite topic, mushrooms. So information from today's talk comes from Paul Stamets' lecture through the MAPS webinar, also his most recent film, Fantastic Fungi, highly recommend you go check it out. Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, Terence McKenna's book, Food of the Gods, and then a repository of all studies that have to do with psilocybin and other types of mushrooms. It's called mushroomreferences.com. Paul Stamets put it together. So let's talk taxonomy. It is the branch of science concerned with how we classify organisms. And so fungi is actually an entire kingdom of life, just like plants and animals. Basically, fungi, plants, and animals are all types of eukaryotes, which means they have a nucleus that's surrounded by a membrane. You contrast this with prokaryotes, which are organisms without membrane-bound organelles, and bacteria is a type of prokaryote. Surprising to most, fungi are actually more like animals than like plants. You might look at a mushroom and say to yourself, this looks more like a plant, but actually they are more closely related to us humans than they are to plants. Why is this? Well, fungi, they inhale oxygen and they exhale CO2 just like humans. And also they get their energy from consuming other things, unlike plants that get their energy from photosynthesis. Fungi includes everything from mushrooms, yeasts, and mold. So a fun fact is that the largest living organism is actually a fungus. It is called the humongous fungus, and it is located in the Blue Mountains of Oregon. It is 2,400 years old and approximately 2,400 acres wide. For millennia, humans have used yeast and molds to create yummy things like bread and cheese, wine and beer. But in the last decade, fungi have definitely become one of the hottest commodities of biotechnology. Basically, scientists are starting to discover the different ways that fungi can help break down everything from plastics, oil spills, heavy metals, and nuclear waste. There are actually mushrooms that are willing to eat everything from polyurethane to petroleum, mercury, and even they will go around Japan's Fukushima nuclear reactor and eat up all that nuclear waste. So basically, we're just starting to scratch the surface when it comes to utilizing fungus to help remedy serious ecological and environmental issues. Fungi have also been used since the dawn of time to address human health issues. Hippocrates, or as I call him, the daddy of medicine, he first described an amadou mushroom as having anti-inflammatory effects and being able to help cauterize wounds. And that was back in 450 BCE, before Christ, people. The antibiotic penicillin was actually accidentally discovered by Alexander Fleming in 1928. Basically, he was growing bacteria in petri dishes and he went on a long vacation. And when he came back, mold had grown and contaminated those dishes, but was actually starting to eat up the bacteria. So basically, what's very fascinating is that a lot of the same health issues that affect a mushroom affect us, and it just points to our greater connection and similarity to fungi. There are actually 23 different species of primates, including us, that eat mushrooms. And obviously, it's clearly in our genetic biological DNA to have this close relationship with fungi. And there's a specific hypothesis called the stoned ape hypothesis that explains the possible origins and evolution of our relationship with fungi. Basically, this hypothesis posits that as the African kind of area, the whole continent started to go from being really heavily forested and a lot of canopy and trees, it started to evolve due to like different environmental factors into more of an open savanna, more open plains. And basically our primate ancestors started to move from the trees and down to the ground and started to occupy more open space. And essentially our ancestors, they started looking on the ground. They were looking for tracks like animal tracks and also animal scat to locate animals when they were hunting. They were also looking at the ground to find different types of plant matter to forage. And essentially on the ground, they met up with mushrooms. Mushrooms commonly grow out of dung of ungulates, which back in the day, ungulates were, starting to populate those open spaces, and they were leaving their poo around essentially, and mushrooms were growing out of them. Here is when our primate ancestors met up with mushrooms. They start eating these magic mushrooms, it's influencing their behavior, And at this very specific same time, the primate brain started to grow in size. This is a phenomenon called encephalization. So basically the theory is that as we're eating these mushrooms, we're expanding our consciousness. So we are also expanding our actual physical brain size. What I think of is this. When mushrooms started to be eaten by these proto-humans, there was 5 different things that started to happen. I call them the big 5 C's. They are expanding communication, specifically verbal communication started to happen. Consciousness, obviously, as we're eating these mind-altering substances, we are expanding our consciousness. Cognition, we're becoming smarter. Our cerebrum, cerebellum, all these brain structures are starting to expand in size. Care, we started to care about each other's existing, surviving, being healthy and thriving. And courage, we started to do things that were a little scarier, because as you're eating these mushrooms, what becomes scary, what becomes you, what becomes them, it's all kind of sort of melding together, and you're taking more risks. So basically, proto-humans were becoming better able to communicate, better able to devise plans. They were caring more about each other and staying healthy and staying safe in their environment. They're being more aware of what they are thinking and feeling, and also what's going on in their environment. Different threats are becoming more obvious to them. And then they're having more and more greater courage. They're getting out there, they're doing things they haven't done before, they're pushing the envelope. And we know today that actually psilocybin can help reduce fear. We've started it off in mice models, and we've shown it with humans too. And that's why psilocybin has been used to help with PTSD, because it lowers the fear response. So in a nutshell, stoned ape hypothesis, prehistoric times, proto-humans are eating these magic mushrooms, and they're helping them, these mushrooms and their effects are helping proto-humans explore, adapt, and evolve in uncharted territory. So what exactly is psilocybin? Psilocybin is the psychoactive compound in magic mushrooms responsible for the high. Psilocin is the other psychoactive compound, but it's very unstable outside of the body, which is why psilocybin gets all of the attention. Albert Hofmann, the chemist who discovered LSD, he was also the first person to isolate these 2 compounds in 1958, and he created the synthetic version of psilocybin that is still used today in research. So what is it that the research shows? The most popular body of research surrounding psilocybin is the potential to treat depression. The first study investigating the safety of psilocybin as a treatment for major depression was published in 2016. It involved only 12 patients with moderate to severe treatment-resistant major depression, meaning other forms of treatment just did not work for these people. These patients received 2 oral doses of psilocybin in a supportive setting 7 days apart. The first dose was just a 10 milligram test dose to make sure that it was safe for that person, and then the second treatment dose was 25 milligrams. There was no control in this group, but psychological support was provided before, during, and after each dose. The primary outcome measured was just the participants' reports of the intensity and effects of psilocybin. But the findings was this: relative to baseline, depressive symptoms were markedly reduced both 1 week and 3 months after treatment. This was the first study ever done on psilocybin's effects on people who have depression. The same authors of this article, they performed a follow-up study published a year later. Basically, they took it a step further. They looked at cerebral blood flow measured with functional MRIs before and after administration of the same 2 type of doses. And this was again for treatment-resistant depression. Basically, the findings were this: decreased depressive symptoms were reported in all 19 patients at 1 week post-treatment, and 9 out of those 19 after the 5-week period. I will hold off for now on discussing the cerebral blood flow findings, because those are a little bit complex, and I want to break those down and compare them to other findings with similar studies. I'll also talk about what the default mode network is in another video. Basically, we're starting to look at how psilocybin affects the amygdala, and there's different findings that I will go into depth later. But the overall point is that researchers are still trying to discover exactly how the brain changes after psilocybin is taken. And there's some sort of reset that occurs in the brain, but we still need to elucidate that. There's also a lot of research on the potential for psilocybin to help people with terminal illnesses. In one very famous study, cancer patients suffering from anxiety and depression were given psilocybin. And this was one of those very awesome random controlled trials, which is basically the gold standard for all of science. The study was double-blind and placebo-controlled, which adds a lot of merit to the findings. There was 29 patients in the study. They had cancer-related anxiety and depression, and they were given a single dose of psilocybin or niacin as the placebo. Both were given in conjunction with therapy. Psilocybin produced immediate, substantial, and sustained improvements in anxiety and depression, and led to decreases in cancer-related demoralization and helplessness, improved spiritual well-being, and increased quality of life. At the 6.5-month follow-up, psilocybin was associated with enduring anti-anxiety and antidepressant effects. Greater than 60% of the participants continued with clinically significant reductions in anxiety and depression. They had sustained benefits in existential distress and quality of life, as well as improved attitudes towards their imminent death. Researchers found that the psilocybin-induced mystical experience was what was responsible for all these therapeutic effects. It was that mystical experience that these patients felt. So, I've discussed the psychological benefits of psilocybin, but there's also promising medical benefits. One of the first medical uses of psilocybin that I ever heard of had to do with cluster headaches. I'd actually never heard of a cluster headache, but essentially a cluster headache is a severe headache attack. Basically, headaches occur in patterns, and there's cluster periods where you get a lot of the headaches, or you might have one that lasts a very long time, but then you go into remission periods as well. They're extremely painful and debilitating. They take away your quality of life, and they're also very much so associated with depression because of the effects that they take and the toll that they take on your body and on your life. So about 5 years ago, I knew this man. He had kind of suffered from cluster headaches his whole life, and his wife and him had gone to a neurologist. They had sought out every different type of solution that they could. Nothing was working. So 5 years ago, they visited a neurologist who told them about the preliminary studies showing that if you take a psychedelic at the onset of your first cluster headache, it can make them stop. So he experimented, and they really, really worked for him. So in terms of the literature, there was a study done where researchers interviewed 53 cluster headache patients who had used either psilocybin or LSD. 26 of the 53 had used psilocybin. 22 of those 26 psilocybin users reported that psilocybin completely aborted their attack. And 18 of the 19 psilocybin users reported an extension of their whole remission period at that time. So psilocybin also has great potential for helping with smoking cessation. An FDA-approved study conducted in 2017 found that 2 to 3 doses of psilocybin in conjunction with cognitive behavioral therapy resulted in higher smoking cessation rates than any other medication or therapy alone. So at a 1-year follow-up, 67% of those psilocybin participants were confirmed to be smoking abstinent still. In comparison, the leading drug for smoking cessation is an antidepressant called Wellbutrin, and it only has a 22% smoking cessation rate at 1-year follow-up. So that's 67% with psilocybin, 22% with Wellbutrin. I will say, the most amazing statistic from this study is that 87% of the participants who took the psilocybin, they rated taking that psilocybin as one of the top 5 most meaningful experiences of their entire life. So let's talk about some non-psilocybin mushrooms for a second, because they have great medical benefits too. And I just want to share a few. So turkey tail is a type of mushroom that's associated with immune health. Studies have proven that turkey tail is a supplementation that can be used as a synergistic treatment to both radiation and chemotherapy for both gastric cancer and breast cancer. Another mushroom I'd like to talk about is lion's mane, and it's associated with brain health. And I can remember this one because if you literally look up a picture of lion's mane, it looks like a tiny brain. So let's see. Studies show that lion's mane has anti-dementia effects in mice. Lion's mane mycelium, which mycelium is the under kind of belly of any mushroom. We see the fruiting body up top above the soil. The mycelium is like the webbed network underneath soil. So lion's mane mycelium can remove what's called amyloid plaque. And amyloid plaque is what is responsible for the effects of dementia. Repeated tests show that lion's mane mycelium can cause neurogenesis when using pluripotent stem cells. That's a really hard word to say. Pluripotent stem cells, meaning that stem cells can stimulate neurite outgrowth in the presence of lion's mane. Paul Stamets, the god of mushrooms, he believes that stacking mushrooms together has the greatest potential for benefit. He's performed multiple studies on the synergism of lion's mane mycelium and psilocybin analogs. He has found that neurite outgrowth, junctions, and forking were all increased in cells exposed to the combo of lion's mane mycelium and psilocybin analogs over just a 10-day period. So, in closing, should I try psilocybin once it's legal? Once it's legal? So my answer to this question is please do your research. And this isn't just researching the science of the drug, the effects it has on your body, all of that. It's also your personal and family history. If you have a history of personality disorders, bipolar disorder, dissociative disorder, schizophrenia, or any other serious mental illness, please do not do psychedelics, especially alone. You need to consult other people who are experts in this field. We still don't know enough about how psychedelics interact with other mental disorders, so please just refrain from doing it. Also, if you have a family history of these diseases, you really need to talk to an expert in the field. I'm talking a clinically or anyone who has a degree or specializes in this type of specific research, consult them. Basically, a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, any of these people. I believe personally that the safest way to try a psychedelic for the first time is in a therapeutic environment with an educated and experienced guide. I foresee a future where psychedelics are basically utilized as medicines that should be administered with great care and safety. I envision professionals such as doctors, nurses, and therapists, or shamans from other cultures and other religions, or stewards of the medicine, someone who has dedicated their life to this, someone like me, who can legally prescribe and guide you through your first therapeutic experience on psychedelics. I believe retreat centers would be a great place for us to experience psychedelics for the first time in a safe environment where there's a ton of experts there to support you. This is basically why I started this YouTube channel. I want to educate people who don't know much about psychedelics. I want to get rid of that stigma, and I want to shine a light on the potential for these psychedelics to be medicines and to heal us